Genius. An exceptionally intelligent person, or one with exceptional skill in a particular area of activity. From Einstein to Isaac Newton, Ali to Alex Ferguson, many people have earned the title over the years. And in my opinion, Mikel Arteta is football's next genius. Of course, it's easy to say that now, with Arsenal having been clear at the top of the table from pretty much the first kick of the season, proving that hindsight is a wonderful thing. In fact, it was just over a year ago when the majority of the Arsenal fanbase wanted him out, with the Gunners being the laughingstock of the Premier League. Funnily enough though, the tale of Arsenal's turnaround goes a lot further back than last season. This is the story of how Mikel Arteta transformed Arsenal. 7,877 days. That's the time between Arsene Wenger's first game and final game as Arsenal manager in May 2018. 3 Premier Leagues, 7 FA Cups, another 7 Charity Shields amongst so many other triumphs during Arsene Wenger's time in charge. The Frenchman alone won nearly 40% of Arsenal's entire trophy cabinet, having taken over the club at their lowest in almost 2 decades. But by 2018, it was time for the Gunners to find a new manager, one that could inspire fans and players to unite and end over a decade of disappointment. Yeah, they chose Unai Emery. Emery's tenure in charge started off well, where in his first 25 games, Arsenal lost just 3 times, a record 5 times better than the end of Wenger's era at the club. But then, things started to go downhill. Embarrassing losses at the end of the season meant Arsenal missed out on the Champions League for the 3rd year in a row, through failure in both the Prem and, more infamously, the Europa League final. Then when you combine heavy spending on underperforming players in the summer, out-of-form players being chose week after week, players getting into fight with fans, and then a final loss to Frankfurt on the 28th of November, you can see the board had no choice but to sack the manager. For years, Arsenal fans and their board weren't really the best of friends, and with Emery's spell in charge highlighting further issues with a lack of connection and communication with the business and football sides of the club, the board needed a feel-good manager to give them some time. Although calling Arteta nothing more than a feel-good appointment is very disrespectful. For years, the tactical quality of players coming through Barcelona's youth academy was well known, and Mikel Arteta was no different. Mix into this the fact he'd been working with Pep Guardiola for over 3 years at Man City, and it's clear to see that he would have been an attractive prospect for any team, not just the red side of North London. And so, in came the Spaniard to try and save Arsenal's campaign. But less than 35 minutes into his first game, Dan Gosling scored to put Bournemouth 1-0 up, where this fan then became the first Gooner to ever tweet that iconic phrase. Arteta out. 1 win in his opening 7 league games certainly didn't help. And by the time they'd been knocked out of the Europa League by Olympiacos in February, the phrase was far from uncommon to be heard amongst Arsenal supporters. And with the side placed 9th while the country's in lockdown, it's hard to imagine how much worse it could get from here.
Oh my god, bro. Oh hell no, man. What the
An embarrassing loss to City in their first game back was made even worse by a now infamous loss against Brighton, seeing the club in the bottom half and looking like a mid-table team. But what happens when you doubt the capabilities of a genius? They prove you wrong. A great end to the season saw Arsenal lift the FA Cup, as star man Aubameyang signed a new deal to keep him at the Emirates. And at the other end of the pitch, the 8 clean sheets Arsenal saw in Arteta's half season at the club matched their tally from the entirety of Emery's first Premier League campaign, with it looking like progress had finally been made. Now let's pause this timeline and fast forward to the modern day real quick, so we can take a look at Arsenal's best players this season. Jesus, Odegaard, Partey, Ramsdale, White, Gabriel, Saliba, Zinchenko, Saka, Martinelli and Xhaka. Of all the names I just mentioned, the final 3 were the only ones actually at the training ground when Arteta took over as manager. And so, as we go into his first opportunity to sign players on a permanent deal, it only makes sense to focus on the biggest aspect of Arteta's rebuild, the transfers. For years, Arsenal's transfers were poor and relied on an outdated method of signing players, which a lot of the time ended up in poor business being done. And nowhere is that more obvious than if we take a look at Emery's final starting 11. Of the 11 players on screen now, just 3 of them are still at the club, showing just how much Arteta had to change in order to make his squad good enough for a title charge. Notably though, the first acquisition that Arsenal made which shaped the squad actually came a year previously, before Arteta had even joined the club, in Edu. Finally, the club had a figure which could link board and coaching expectations through a better transfer strategy, allowing the vision of Mikel Arteta to come to life. In the summer of 2020, the Spaniard was able to offload Mkhitaryan and Martinez whilst bringing in Partey and Gabriel, making up the earlier signs of this Arsenal side we know today. Then, a great start to the season which saw the Gunners top the league was quickly cancelled out by a drop in form. And when I say drop, I mean drop. A now infamous run of 8 losses in 12 games, including a 2-0 defeat against rival Spurs, had the Gunners down in 15th place before a clash against Chelsea. With the club destined for another loss, it looked like time was up for Mikel Arteta, and so the Spaniard desperate, he finally turned to the youth. For the first time ever, Arteta gave Emile Smith-Rowe a Premier League appearance, with the 20-year-old being partnered by 2 19-year-olds in Bukayo Saka and Gabriel Martinelli either side of him. Less than an hour in, and the gamble had paid off, as Emile Smith-Rowe set up Bukayo Saka for the side's third in a 3-1 win. Less than a week later, the January transfer window opened, allowing Arteta the opportunity to offload Ozil, Sokratis and Mustafi, whilst also bringing in 22-year-old Martin Odegaard on loan to help bolster midfield options. The Gunners followed up their victory against Chelsea with 4 wins from the next 5, even going unbeaten all the way through to February, where after a little bump on the road, they saw out the season with 8 wins from 13 and an immaculate 5-game spell in May, matching their finish from the season before. However, this year, there would be no silverware, and therefore no Europe. This put more pressure on the side, with Arteta having the success of winning an FA Cup in his first season. A lot of the anger from the fans moved off of him, and back onto the board. To counter this, they gave Edu and Arteta a decent budget to work with, as the club looked to fill in holes in their squad, as well as offloading David Luiz, Willian, Guendouzi, Torreira and Bellerin amongst many others. First through the doors would be young talents in Nuno Tavares and Albert Sambi Lokonga, before Ben White came in to boost their defensive options. But before they could get anyone else in, the Premier League came round once again, and Arsenal looked like they'd been caught napping. The Brentford loss highlighted the first time Arteta looked to be in real danger of losing his job, as the newly promoted team were able to brush the Gunners aside, with the most worrying thing being the fact that only one side out on the pitch showed any form of identity, and it wasn't Arsenal. To combat this, a ball-playing goalkeeper in Aaron Ramsdale was brought in, a move which saw heavy backlash from the fans. On the same day, Odegaard returned to the club on a permanent deal, a player who Mikel Arteta had loved and would prove to be pivotal in their turnaround. Now though was time for 2 huge fixtures. A 2-0 loss for the Gunners against Chelsea was fortunate if anything, proven by the fact that they would lose 5-0 to Man City just 6 days later. With the signing of Tomiyasu being the final transfer of the window, Arteta's days were numbered. Arteta out could be heard or seen everywhere, whether it was banners and chants in the stadium, or tweets and TikToks online. The feeling was very clear going into Arsenal's next game against Norwich, that a win was necessary. And a win is exactly what they got. In elegant fashion, Aubameyang slotted home the eventual winner, scoring Arsenal's first goal of the season, with the club having conceded 9 in the same time frame. A 1-0 away win would follow, once again not in convincing fashion, as it took an Odegaard free kick to break the deadlock. Next up, the North London derby. 45 minutes in and Arsenal were 3 goals up, as they overtook Spurs, who just 3 matches earlier had found themselves the furthest possible distance away from the Gunners. This win was probably the first sign that something special was to come, but to many fans at the time, they saw their club 10th in the league and were far from convinced, thinking it may just be another one of Arteta's purple patches. Fast forward to December, and it looked like they were right. 3 losses from their last 4 games had ended their 8-game unbeaten spell, with their final loss to Everton being a particularly bitter pill to swallow. However, 5 wins on a bounce going into the new year had breathed life back into the Emirates crowd, which was something that was needed, as next up they faced Manchester City. This would be the real test to see how far Arsenal would come, and despite going on to lose 2-1, I'm sure many of you watching would agree, the performance itself passed with flying colours. Arsenal controlled play on and off of the ball, and it took 2 dodgy penalty calls, a numerical advantage and a last minute winner, all going in the away side's advantage for City to take the 3 points. Going head to head with arguably the best side in the world, and if anything being the better team, showed even the most pessimistic Gooner that Arteta might just be the man. However, after impressing through to March, bad habits started to creep in again for Arsenal, and they went on another poor run, losing 4 from 5 before going on to bottle the Champions League after a Derby Day loss to Spurs was followed up by another defeat to Newcastle. However, once again, the transfer window came round, and Arsenal meant business. The signings of technically able players with winning DNA gave the Spaniard what his side was missing, and allowed them to fully transform into the monster team we see today. Mix into this the returning Saliba, who'd spent 3 years out on loan in France, and Arsenal were ready for the season. This season we've seen the transformation of Saka allow Arsenal to dominate either channel, and being forced into putting faith into the youth 2 seasons previously had worked out, as Martinelli, Saka and Nketiah and Ramsdale are showing maturity and ability beyond their years, with the latter's involvement in their upturning form in late 2021 often being understated. Arteta's built a system which can win titles, making it hard for opponents to beat them, and even harder to stop them. 5 games in and they were the only side in the division with a 100% record before losing to Man United 3-1. To many, this was going to be a turning point in their season, when they went from title contenders back down to the same old Arsenal, and I guess they would be right in thinking it was a turning point. A turning point in the extent of their dominance. 12 games, 10 wins, 0 losses, 7 clean sheets and just 7 goals conceded. It's fair to say that since Marcus Rashford put Man United 2 goals up on the 4th of September, Arsenal haven't looked back. And with the two sides facing once again this Sunday, the Gunners find themselves in a position to go 8 points clear at the top. In less than 18 months, Arteta's taken the Gunners from the bottom of the league to the summit of English football. The Spaniard has brought unity and joy back to the Gunners, from the fans to the players, players to the coaches, and coaches to the board. For the first time in what feels like forever, Arsenal Football Club are a team.